Welcome to Seafoodie, a podcast series that, through the lens of food, seeks to have a meaningful conversation about the important issues surrounding seafood and the complex system that gets it to your mouth. I'm your host, Chef Robert Jones, and I interview folks from all over the country who make up the fabric of our seafood supply chain. Those who farm it, catch it, sell it, innovate it, protect it for future generations, and make it delicious on your plate. We have an exciting show today. That is apropos to start with a quote from Winston Churchill. In 1931, Churchill published a futurist essay that many people have forgotten about that included a number of predictions, but one really stands out. With, quote, "With greater knowledge of what are called hormones, i.e. the chemical messengers in our blood, it will be possible to control the growth of tissue. We shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken in order to eat the breast or wing, by growing these parts separately under a suitable medium." In the intervening 90 years, authors and sci-fi futurists like H.G. Wells, David Keller, and Margaret Atwood have all made references to, quote, lab-grown meat. But it was largely considered sci-fi entertainment. But then something changed. In 2013, the world watched in wonder as a simple hamburger was grilled on a stage in London. But it was not simple at all. It was a burger grown in a petri dish in a Dutch laboratory from the cells of a cow that was very much still alive. That event sparked a space race of sorts in food technology. And 7 years later, my guest today is the CEO of the company that very well may be the first in the world to go to the commercial market with cell-based meat. In this case, the cells of fish. Please welcome to the show today, Lou Cooperhouse of the San Diego-based startup Blue Nalu. It's great to have you on the episode, Lou.
Well, thank you, Robert. I'm really excited to be on your show today.
So I want to spend a lot of time talking about the technology and the company, but I'm fascinated to hear about you first. So did a high school or college age Lou read Winston Churchill or Margaret Atwood and decide your destiny was to grow meat in a laboratory?
Not at all, Robert. Interestingly, my career, however, has been all about food innovation and technology commercialization. And went to school actually for microbiology and food science at Rutgers University in New Jersey. My career started at Campbell Soup and then Conagra and then Nestle, but it was always working in the company, pioneering new technologies, new businesses, working in cross-functional teams from an early age. So in the 35 years since that time, I've consistently been involved with commercializing technologies, initially around perishable foods like modified atmosphere, cooked chill, sous vide, high pressure processing, and subsequently got involved with the first onset of products for medical nutrition, disease management, like celiac disease, diabetes, and really what I called oxymoron foods, creating foods that taste great, that people really miss, that bring together the culinary background and the food science together. And along the way, since the year 2000, I've done a lot of consulting, but over that 20 years, I also started and was the founding director of a program called the Rutgers Food Innovation Center, an incubator for startups. And frankly, Robert, what I started to witness was a total transformation in our food supply chain as I saw consumers really shift from eating foods that I was very familiar with that were convenient or healthy for themselves or nutritious, the foods that resonated with metrics around sustainability, and where foods really were about making a difference personally and perhaps politically in kind of resonating what your own values are. So I was really there and I remember the 2013 incident, if you will, in the Netherlands that sparked the first cell-based hamburger. And I said, oh my God, if you can make a hamburger product or any meat-based product without the animal, that I literally call the Holy Grail. Yeah. It'd be totally transformative for the planet and is so critically needed. And that really spawned my interest in this whole category of alternative protein, looking at both plant-based, but very, as we'll talk more about, just totally excited about the potential for cell-based and how that could be applied specifically to seafood.
That's really fascinating. I want to come back to the nuances of the technology in just a second. You touched on the shift that you saw working in the food industry, where sustainability was ticking up the list of consumer priorities. And I've talked to a number of folks in this space at this point, and that seems to be a really common thread, is that most of these startups like yours are very mission driven, about reforming the food supply chain. I wonder if you would tell the audience a little bit about why you feel strongly about that, why we need some sort of disruption in our global food system like this.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, Robert, if you will, as a veteran of the food industry and uh, very familiar with the space, I candidly really felt that one of the most vulnerable supply chains on our planet was our seafood supply chain. Just really being part of the industry in so many different ways over the years. And I say that meaning the demand for seafood, as you know, is at all-time high. Consumers love seafood. And even the medical community is encouraging people to have more seafood at the expense of red meat, for the health benefits. All that is wonderful. And as gross domestic product increases around the world, incomes increase, so too will come demand. So what our problem, as you know, is our diminishing supply chain. But even moreover, what's really critical, especially in this post-COVID world that we're in, is the issue of food security. And as I looked at it, and kind of back to my comment about how vulnerable the supply chain is, with all the news that we have about acidification, warming oceans, and the potential impact and algae blooms and environmental disasters that could have to our seafood supply, it's extraordinary. So the world needs, as I started the company, the world needs a third solution. Wild caught and farm raised need another solution to really help supplement that supply chain for the future. And furthermore, unlike land animals, what really kind of captivated me about working on cell-based technology for the seafood category was you also have other issues around human health. Mercury, number one, pregnant nursing women that are basically giving warnings to have 0, 1, or 2 to 3 servings, 4-ounce servings per week of seafood. And they frankly, back to consumers, they don't really know what tuna belongs to what category. It's confusing, and our model is actually be able to make cell-based seafood that has no mercury at all, so as much as you want. Of course, there's microplastics, environmental pollutants that might be associated with your seafood, so it really kind of creates a demand-driven model versus today's somewhat supply-restrictive model of seafood. We could literally put factories manufacture seafood that's exactly the same as conventional products anywhere in the world, close to market demand, not necessarily having to ship it 7,000, 9,000 miles from Southeast Asia to Eastern United States with a 30% loss of bycatch and a maybe 60% yield. Our product will be 100% yield, no head, no tail, no bones, no skin. So it really is quite a game changer for the supply chain that we feel is really quite can in fact be quite disruptive to the industry and really frankly offer a number of benefits to the food service and retail customers around the world.
Well, you evoked Margaret Atwood there with the no head, no tail, no skin, no bones. So I think we better jump in and talk about how this happens. So how does the technology work?
Yeah, just similar to the first example back in 2013, the concept is to extract cells from an animal and then propagate them in very large volumes. There are different techniques for how this gets accomplished. And this is really something that's not made in the lab, although that is somehow erroneously, what this category has been called. This is really no different than many other food processes. I equate what we're doing to really growing this product, if you will, in a microbrewery. If you think about it, fundamentally, we're growing cells of fish in large stainless steel tanks. The industry calls bioreactors. The whole industry is still somewhat in its infancy right now, but we're not that far away from having product in commerce. But what commerce looks like is large stainless steel tanks that might have muscle cells in them, or fat cells, or fibroblasts, connective tissue cells that are independently grown in these large stainless steel tanks, then blended together in the same exact nutritional composition, analytical composition as conventional products. And we've actually did a demonstration last December of 2019, where we actually showed that our product had the same structural integrity as conventional seafood. We did that with yellowtail. And our objective was, can a product eat the same? You know, can it brown, caramelize, freeze thaw, gets steamed, you know, deep fried, any kind of abrasive technology that might be used to cook product, or acidified, like you might find in kimchi or poke or ceviche. Also a bit of abrasive condition for cells, but fish in general, or prepared raw. And sure enough, our product, you know, functioned and tasted and performed the same in all those characteristics. So we're on our way to actually manufacturing that product, but it really begins, Robert, with kind of the fundamentals of getting cells to propagate for long periods of time. They double and double and double. Then we freeze them, and then you create what's called a cell line, a cell bank. So it's a bit of a Darwinian concept of survival of the fittest, really getting these cells to grow to a very long time. And then they become frozen down. They become, if you will, an ingredient that then goes into this future microbrewery factory I mentioned. And that becomes feedstock for really producing what becomes the actual fillets of seafood. So there's an awful lot of technical processes in between that. But in principle, we're literally, this process, as you may recall, was initially called in vitro. We were making the cells outside of the body, just like we're doing that with living human beings now, you know, in a different way, clearly. But in this case, we're making not living fish, but fish fillets, fish tissue outside of the body. So it's some similarities to other things that, you know, humankind has done. But we're very excited that this is not that far away from being a commerce.
That's great. As part of my research for this conversation with you, I just finished reading Billion Dollar Burger, Chase Purdy's book, and that's when it occurred to me that I think a lot of the original ideas around this started with medical advancements for looking at growing tissue and organs for humans for healthcare purposes. And
Correct.
You know, incredible that it hopped over to figuring out a way to feed us as well. And to your point, and I've seen these photos of these drawings of, you know, what projected full-scale facilities would look like, and they do look like microbreweries, giant stainless steel tanks in large warehouses. And to your point about the carbon footprint, instead of all of that being harvested on the coast somewhere and flown from Tokyo every day, or you could actually build those facilities close to the population centers where there's the demand for the food.
That's correct. And I think that's, from an environmental footprint point of view, unfortunately, nobody's been able to measure this just yet. But as you know, it varies across the globe, species by species. But you're right, the level of, it is frankly, you know, the seafood industry is, if you will, still quite biblical, you know, in the context that we're sending out boats with labor. We're not catching, we're fishing. You know, we're you know, it's not the most efficient process. You know, if you think about it in that context, you know, with a fair amount of bycatch, which is quite unfortunate. You know, you never know what your yield will be. And then we're flying those long distances only to be, you know, filleted at the food service level with maybe a weighted average of 60%. Could be 80, could be 40, obviously depending on the species. So all that gets replaced with this new 100% yield driven model close to market without all that transportation or the associated costs of labor and fuel to actually capture the seafood. Of course, the animal suffering aspect is certainly a big issue for many consumers. You know, so it really, you know, that really resonates, you know, with so many positive benefits. And we frankly have really seen a great deal, even as much interest as there has been in our company in the whole category, but in this new post-pandemic world, the issue of food security has really become, you know, even a much stronger opportunity that we can address.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I totally get the transportation aspect of measuring the carbon footprint in terms of inputs in this formula. And I get the intangible for some consumers like animal welfare. I'm curious about some of the other inputs that you would use to measure sustainability, like the amount of water and energy that would be used as compared to what it would cost to farm or catch these fish wild. Do we know about that yet?
Unfortunately, we don't. Obviously, for a few reasons. One is on both sides of the equation, we don't know. I don't think we don't have a good handle on the control, if you will, the current system and what that footprint looks like for, say, mahi-mahi or red snapper or bluefin tuna. And as you can imagine, it varies considerably from one species to the next on the control basis. On our situation where we're manufacturing these seafood products in this demand-driven model, as I mentioned, we're still too early to even know what our usage of energy and water will be. But clearly, yes, that will be higher on the one aspect, but the offsets will be, enormous compared to the current control situation. And again, it will vary species by species. At the end of the day, we're all about, maintaining the biodiversity in our oceans. As we heard Sylvia Earle and many others say, we need to keep fish in the oceans to preserve that ecosystem. So it's really about, taking the stress off the oceans, and how does one value that also? So there's so many different ways to look at this, and it is quite challenging, but certainly welcome any of your listeners who have some opportunities to work together on really doing this LCA and other measurements of sustainability to reach out, because we're quite intrigued by how to measure that ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting you evoke Sylvia Earle, obviously a huge hero of mine and a lot of people who've worked on fisheries issues for years. And on the biodiversity aspect, as consumers of seafood, most people around the world are not diverse at all. I mean, the vast majority of seafood that is consumed is, salmon, shrimp, and tuna. From that point of view, I'm wondering what species you're looking at starting with and why you've made those choices.
A great question. We've actually, our company was very strategic from the outset. When I say that, we weren't necessarily driven purely by the science. You mentioned earlier that this technology began on the mammalian side, with humans and intestines, and obviously there's been so much work, that has been conducted with other mammalian species, and frankly, the category began on mammalian-based products like beef initially, but we really began looking at the opportunity. If you apply this amazing technology against a category where it could have the greatest possible benefit, we clearly said seafood for all the reasons we discussed. But then within the category species, to your point, we actually put together very early on a species selection strategy. There's literally so many different species that, that we could prepare. And you're right, consumers, certainly in the US, only know a few species for sure. And there's so many delicious species that can be prepared. So what we actually put together was this whole matrix looks at everything from per capita consumption of seafood. It also looks at, therefore what kind of familiarity people have, but also issues like mercury. What species have the highest amount of mercury, where a product we prepare could really be, if you will, a bit of an oxymoron. Bluefin tuna without mercury, is something that could be quite, really quite resonate, for example. But we also looked at issues like overfishing, illegal fishing, watch lists. We looked at products that were imported. So we're very oriented as a company about not competing with aquaculture or local industry. So for example, as a company, we're not working on salmon in this country, because, or cod, for example, because we do those species very well. The FDA, the numbers are all over the place, but the FDA has identified that 94% of the seafood consumed in America is imported. So we say, let's focus on the 94%. Not only can we have all the benefits we described, but we also can build factories and create jobs. So to answer your question, our first species that we're launching with is actually mahi-mahi. Can't be farmed, not very well, because it's a very aggressive fish, as I'm sure you're quite familiar. And And mahi-mahi is something that, Americans do know, but 80% is imported. I'm sorry, over 90% is imported, 80% of which comes from Ecuador, Peru, and Taiwan, I believe. So that being said, we can actually create a product that is familiar to Americans. Obviously, it's familiar to people that go to Hawaii. In California, it's quite familiar as well, and certainly the Southeast, like in Florida. So we're very excited to bring mahi-mahi to market, but we've also developed red snapper, yellowtail, and bluefin tuna. So we actually have 4 species that are currently under development, and it's a long process to get product through the whole cycle. But as you can tell, we're specifically focusing on the target of the category of finfish. So we're not working on crustaceans or mollusks at this point, but finfish, so many opportunities, and we're literally developing 2 new species per year. So we're literally putting together a library of finfish at this point, so that we can really become much more of a supply chain solution, not a single species answer. And that we feel will give us a significant competitive advantage to really bring together a wide array of products. And as we're working with restaurateurs, that they're quite excited. We've already had dialogue about changing out their entire menu. So rather than just having cell-based single species, let's actually do it in 3 or 5 different ways on a given menu. So anyway, that's been our approach, and it's been really well received.
So let's talk about mahi-mahi for a second. So just so people can visualize what you mean. So starting with mahi, what does the product look like? Is this like a fillet that grows? Is it a paste? What does the consistency look like of the final product?
Great question, because I'm sure it's very confusing to many of your listeners. So again, it begins with those cells, the muscle cells or the fat cells. Mahi-mahi, as you know, is a very lean fish, relatively white in color, primarily muscle cells. What we're doing literally is growing these muscle cells in large volumes, for example, and the product does look a bit like paste, but then it forms, these tubules form, the fibers form within the cell matrix in a very natural way. So we're actually not doing any genetic engineering. We're actually working with muscle cells to create muscle, or fat cells to create fat. And we're not differentiating cells to be something they weren't designed to be, which is a very unique thing that we're doing. And we're also not using genetic engineering in our process, also distinctive from some other companies in the space, which have indicated they are using genetic engineering. Nothing wrong with that, but we feel that given how potentially different this is for the early adopters, we want to make the bar as low as possible. That I would try that for sure, and that's really been a really positive response we have gotten. But yes, so the product actually, when it's formed on the production line in this microbrewery, if you will, it looks a bit like the microbrewery then connected to a traditional seafood processing facility. The product comes out after the process into the fillet, or if it might be, for example, a cube. So for example, if we're making a product that might be in the cube form, that might be used in poke or ceviche, that we can do. We want to make the product in a fillet form, maybe 3, 4, 5 ounces, that we can do. Right now, we're not there yet on the fillet piece, but our team will be working on that over the next 12 months. Our first product will actually be more of a 3/4 inch cube, whole muscle product. And we've actually already done some tests with food service operators with great interest, because the beauty of mahi-mahi is it's used in various parts of the menu as an appetizer, as an entree. It's adaptable to be used in a fish taco, of course, or ceviche, poke, and also even in soups and salads, or even on flatbread topping. So we're already excited to introduce this, to really demonstrate, here's a single introduction of product. It's all about getting the early adopters and really showcasing this in various menu applications. And then we'll migrate from that cube to the fillet, and then we'll introduce other species on top of that, like bluefin tuna.
So at the top, you chose your words very carefully and said you are looking to make a product to supplement the existing seafood supply chain, which consists of aquaculture and farm-raised seafood and wild capture. Um,
Correct.
that's notably different rhetoric than I've heard from some of the folks in the plant-based community. And I bring that up because sort of the next two phases that you've got to get through, right? You've got to finish your R&D and go to scale, and then you've got to get federal regulators to give you approval. And some of that involves some politics of navigating, because this is clearly an example where technology has outpaced the rulemaking and regulatory environment. I assume that all of this we've got to figure out. So as you are having that conversation with federal regulators about how to manage this industry, are you seeing obstruction from folks in the sort of incumbent industry of fishing industry?
We're not, Robert. And to your point, I do recognize that, others in the plant-based category in particular have been very vocal about, being frankly a bit opposed to the conventional agricultural sector. I come from that world. I formerly worked at ConAgra and many, so I know this world, and I don't come from this really from that perspective as a as more of an activist, if you will. I come for this to really create a solution to a global challenge. And to your point, this is all about working in collaboration with the seafood industry. The consumers, as I know very well, love choice. So we want them to have three options: wild caught, farm raised, and now cell based. In fact, we recently, last week, in fact, you might have noticed that we had some announcements come out about our work on nomenclature. We want consumers to know that a product is cell based and they have a third option. We find this to be an advantage, to those that are looking for a product that they might be concerned about when it comes to mercury or microplastics or whatever their issues might be. And for those, and we want there to be no confusion or misunderstanding that this product this is not farm raised, it's not wild caught, it's just manufactured in this microbrewery, if you will. We find what we're doing to be, a great advantage, but we also want consumers to have that very informed choice. And in our recent financing round, we actually secured funding from 5 different strategic partners, including Nutreco, arguably the world's largest supplier of aquaculture feed, who's working together with us. Their whole industry is about supporting aquaculture. They're very excited to similarly offer another solution to feed the planet in the years to come. That's what we're all about as well. And we need a new solution. We can't be blind to that, but we also have to be very realistic that the only way to get this product in commerce is through collaboration with partners. We don't have, we want to get this, as quickly as possible to our consumers. And we will not be creating our own sales force and distribution forces around the world. Instead, we'll be working with organizations that have those kind of relationships. In addition to Nutreco, we also partner with Griffith Foods, another supply chain partner in the U.S., but also Rich Products in the U.S., which has the brands Mori Seafood and CPAC, and also Pomoan from Korea and Sumitomo from Japan. So we're all about working collaboratively to bring our products to market, and with organizations that already have that infrastructure in place, and that's really key to our ability to move as aggressively as possible.
Yeah, and in the list of names you just mentioned, it struck me immediately that there's some cross-pollination in the leadership of those organizations with groups like the National Fisheries Institute, which is great because it means that you have folks in the wild capture community who are getting acclimated to this idea and figuring out how it might fit into their portfolio and their businesses.
Absolutely.
So let's go back to the conversation about federal regulation and navigating that, because this is new and it wasn't imagined when the original regulatory framework was set up to manage safety and health for food. So what does that look like as you work with the USDA and or FDA on setting up the rules to give you guidance and clarity about how to go to market and how to keep consumers safe?
No, it's a key question, because you're right. Except for a few years ago, around the world, in no nation was this product approved for sale and commerce. And what was really quite exciting, frankly, in the US is that the FDA and USDA got together a little over 2 years ago in a variety of public meetings. And I actually was attended the two that existed, one at FDA, one at USDA offices. And at the level, at the senior-most level, it was Secretary Perdue from USDA and then Commissioner Gottlieb from FDA got together and brought in a team of experts. And frankly, Robert, told the audience that this is American innovation. This is something that we understand. It's what we don't understand is the specific processes that companies are using. And what they also indicated, and I had a chance to testify myself at these meetings, as did many others, what they wanted to internalize was how these products should be regulated for cell-based meat and poultry, because that wasn't really in the wheelhouse, if you will, of the USDA. That knowledge of the scientific aspects of mammalian cell culturing. So they determined that FDA and USDA would jointly provide regulation for cell-based meat and poultry, and the FDA, which already has that expertise, would solely regulate cell-based seafood. And they frankly encourage companies to come, in their words, early and often, please meet with us so we can understand how this works, what you're doing, and what differences might exist from one company to the other. And sure enough, Blue Nile did just that. So we literally have met with the FDA in person in the days when we could meet in person last year, and subsequently via video call. And they really addressed two kind of fundamental areas of focus. One is food safety, and one is food labeling. So I kind of mentioned just before that the latter about food labeling, and they wanted to know, for example, how might this product be distinguished from conventional wild-caught or farm-raised seafood? And that really implies what will be the common or usual name that will be used to describe this process. And I recently wrote about that on Medium also, but a common or usual name is something, if this were breakfast products that we might enjoy, that's called cereal. If this product is an alternative to sugar, it might be called zero-calorie sweetener. So those are just some nuanced words that might be a bit meaningless to consumers, but it is a way to distinguish the product from the conventional product. Nonetheless, so we just commissioned a study on that, and we brought on an independent researcher who formerly chaired an FDA task force, Bill Hallman from Rutgers, to really do a peer-reviewed study on nomenclature. I needed an enormous methodology, talking over 3,000 consumers, testing 7 different names versus 3 controls, and identified that cell-based performed best. Neutral term, not derogatory, not that exciting, but one that consumers got. They understood it. They said, oh, it's not wild-caught, not farm-raised. It's something different. They didn't necessarily know what it was. Then we explained to them what it was, and they said, oh, that makes a lot of sense. That does perform well. That was really key to our research, that consumers knew the difference, and they didn't find it to be something they might misunderstand. And the other piece is food safety, as I mentioned. And so we've literally have provided that documentation to FDA in full transparency, exactly what we're doing, how we're doing it, even though we're still early in our process, and we'll learn a lot over the next couple of years as we get further in our engineering milestones. But it's sharing our process, gaining feedback, and it's an iterative process. That's what FDA wants. Tell me as much as you know, and we'll ask you more information. And we're literally comparing our product versus conventional, mahi-mahi, for example, for all the analytical values, because we want to demonstrate that a product has the same nutritional composition and the same functionality, meaning taste, texture, mouthfeel, et cetera. In every aspect, it really looks and is the same as conventional product. So it's a long process, but we're well underway, and it's gone very well.
We need to take just a quick break to recognize our sponsors for the show. But when we come back, I want to pick up with the research that you did with Dr. Hallman. I watched that presentation at the IFT conference last week, and it was really fascinating. We'll be right back.
The American Shoreline Podcast Network and CoastalNewsToday.com are brought to you by LJA Engineering with 28 offices along the Gulf Coast. The folks at LJA Engineering are at the top of the craft in the areas of coastal restoration, coastal infrastructure, rivers and channels, numeric modeling, disaster recovery, and design and construction oversight. And now they have a brand new coastal resiliency department headed up by our very own Peter Ravella. Check them out at lja.com. We are also brought to you by Coastal Transplants. Coastal Transplants prides itself on offering specific environmental and horticultural expertise with practical first-hand knowledge of all aspects of coastal revegetation projects. Their high-quality native and wetland plants, extensive agricultural and horticultural experience, along with their skilled and respectful crews, make Coastal Transplants your one-stop solution for restoring coastal ecology of your barrier island community. Learn more at coastaltransplants.com. And we are brought to you by the Dune Science Group. Did you know that fiberglass is one of the strongest and most durable building materials in the world? That it is resistant to deterioration caused by UV light and salt water? Well, the Dune Science Group does. They offer a full slate of solutions for dune walkovers and boardwalks that are made of fiberglass and built to last. They can handle your dune walkover project from beginning to end, including permitting, design, and construction of the strongest and most durable dune walkover on the market. Learn more at thedunesciencegroup.com.
Okay, we're back. I'll put a link in the show when we post it to your article on Medium about the research that you did with Dr. Hallman at Rutgers. I thought it was really fascinating from a couple of points of view. One is the level of transparency that you're putting towards this and putting it right in front of consumers and getting their feedback about labeling. And I'm curious, and you tested sort of the derogatory terms like fake and schmeat and synthetic, and then some of the terms that we hear from more of the animal welfare crowd, like slaughter-free and cruelty-free. But it sounds like what really resonated and was clear with consumers was the term cell-based. And I wonder if you can shed a little light on the results of that research and how people perceive that term and what kind of imagery it evoked for consumers compared to farm-raised or wild-caught.
At first, I want to acknowledge that we didn't test names that were derogatory, like lab-grown or slaughter-free or clean or fake or anything like that, because one of the principles that Dr. Hallman laid out was the term cannot be derogatory towards one side or the other of the equation. It really needed to be demonstrable of the process, and that's really part of the methodology that he put together was defining what are the. Just like we put together a species selection strategy for Blue Nalu, he put together kind of a nomenclature selection strategy that he presented to the FDA as well.
I see.
So it has to be this type of a term. And he actually looked at somewhere between 70 and 100 different names that are out there in various forms that the media has used. And he discounted a great number of them. And he really found no methodology that anybody had done globally to date that would be appropriate for common and usual name labeling. So in the context of that, Robert, what that means is you can't prime the consumer. You can't say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Consumer or Miss Consumer, let me tell you exactly what we're doing with this process. What do you think we should call it? Or using some analog of some other process. So that's priming. So what's really important is that a consumer see a package, no time to look. They just have to look at the label and understand, do I get it or do I not get it? And when I say I don't get it, what I also mean is, do I not think it's something else? So that was really the key to kind of get into the weeds here. So we actually came up with 7 different terms like cell-based, cell-cultured, cultivated, grown directly from the cells of, cultivated from the cells of, names like that. That were and cultured and just compare those versus wild caught, farm raised, and no label at all. So if you will, 3 controls. And what we really found was that a number of the names that performed the best, frankly, all had the word cell in them, because that was definitely something different. And when you use the word cultivated or cultured, it was frequently confused with, as you would imagine, farm raised. Mm-hmm. So the wrong answers went heavily towards something that we didn't want to happen, which was farm raised. We wanted there to be, a clear distinction of what our product is not, as well as what our product is. We're very excited about, Robert, was we also had in there some questions about willingness to buy. And wild-caught did the best, but farm-raised and cell-based did statistically the same. So really, really exciting news that here, this is without being primed even, without any marketing backup. Hey consumer, cell-based seafood, what would be your willingness to purchase this the next 6 months? Farm-raised and cell-based actually performed very similarly. Of course, wild-caught did the best. But that was very exciting for us too, that without even any education yet, there's a great deal of interest in these products. So we're quite excited at not just the nomenclature study, but also the fact that the consumer interest did quite well without any aid.
So you are navigating the regulatory environment. You're doing the research on what potential consumer uptake would be. What's the timeline that we're looking at before we might see products in stores or restaurants somewhere?
Yeah, great. Thanks for that question, because we're very excited to be literally 12 to 18 months away from having a product in commerce. So we recently announced leasing almost a 40,000 square foot facility in San Diego. That'll house what we have our internal language for 5 phases of growth. So this is what we call phase 3. Phase 3 is the first time our company's in commerce. Earlier phases are more pilot scale and benchtop. So what phase 3 is frankly this mini factory, and that's where we'll be about this time next year in the second half of 2021. We will have this 40,000 square foot operation up and running. We anticipate having the FDA pathway clearly identified and all the documentation completed. So yes, we'll be in commerce. That's our plan, the latter half of 2021. Still small volume, Robert. We're only doing several hundred pounds per week. And it's not really meant to be a large scale factory because frankly, we have a lot to learn still. We want to really, especially on the engineering side, to get into manufacturing one species after the next. So really a hybrid of R&D, but also a place to test market and get feedback. So it's a wonderful, platform to learn. And then that, however, becomes the precedent for large scale manufacturing. So we're actually seeing our first factory breaking ground, we think quite likely by 2024, possibly a year earlier. So we're just a few years away from breaking ground on large scale production. And again, these factories could be located, wherever populations are. Could be Southern California, could be the Northeastern United States, could be Seoul, Korea, or Tokyo, Japan. So it really could be various places around the planet. And that'll be in part, based on how our partnerships work and kind of bring these products directly to market.
So 90 years to the year since Winston Churchill made his futuristic pronouncement about chickens.
That's right.
Sounds like you guys are going to be in stores or restaurants, at least somewhere. I know there's a lot of people working in this space right now on beef, like Memphis Meat and Mosa and Aleph Farms in Israel, and several folks in the seafood community, ranging from Singapore to San Diego. It looks like everybody's sort of in a similar space, but it feels like Blue Nalu is a little bit out ahead of the pack. Do you think you might be the first to market for cell-based meat?
I'm pretty sure we'll be. We never know. We're excited by the whole category growing around the world. We do feel we might be first to market with cell-based seafood. We might even be the first to market with cell-based anything in the United States because we're under FDA only, and the regulations might be a little more complex on the FDA, USDA regulated products. I don't know though. But that's not really, our point is just to really kind of market. We're the only one really working on this broad array of species at the fillet category, where others are working more. And there's so many opportunities for success, across the whole protein spectrum. Mm-hmm. So there are those on the poultry side working on chicken nuggets or chicken fillets. In our case, we're working on the higher value fillet category, and also the medallions and the dices, but it's a whole muscle product. Others are working more on ground and form products. that might be used in cakes and dumplings and things like that. So again, there's so many niches, some large, some smaller, but it's a huge industry, as you know. So there will be a lot of successful companies in the future, and so we're just excited to really, ideally have a strong presence in the fin fish fillet category, at least during the initial decade.
So I want to close out by asking you to put your futurist hat on. So July 20th, 2040. What does the world look like? What does the global food system look like?
I really, thanks for that question, Robert. I read the report by A.T. Kearney, which actually, which is on our website, on our resources link, but it's a study that actually talks about 2040, interestingly, and it projects that there might be 35% global market share of cell-based proteins within all protein consumed. They're actually predicted that from the year 2025 to 2040, cell-based proteins will grow at 41% annual growth rate from, frankly, a base of 0, all the way to getting 35% global market share, where plant-based products will grow at 9% annual growth rate, representing 25% global market share. And conventional meat, frankly, becomes unconventional and goes down to 40%. So you have 35, 25, and 40. So what we're 2040, the answer to your question, consumers will have 3 choices. All of them will be somewhat equally distributed. And some products, frankly, take, for example, a ribeye steak, on the cell-based category, it might be very challenging to develop. So perhaps the conventional products will be the one that, really, still is the most highly sought after. But in the case of fillets, we think that we'll have a significant proportion of that category, particularly as demand increases. Again, we need a third solution, and many species may become unavailable, or God forbid, due to environmental issues between now and 2040, some species might become unavailable altogether, and we might actually be able to dominate some species that otherwise may not, exist. So the world, sadly, will change in the next 20 years, and we're prepared to have that third option for consumers.
Well, I am personally really looking forward to having my guilt-free bluefin poke bowl. So if you could move that up to the top of the list, I'd greatly appreciate it.
It's of interest to us as well.
Lou, I can't thank you enough for taking the time today to talk to us and tell the listeners about this incredible new technology and really how close we are to it being a reality. And tell everybody how they can find out more information about Blue Nalu.
Again, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Our website is www.bluenalu.com. It's BLUENALU.com. Nalu, by the way, is the Hawaiian word for wave, kind of where the company got started. And Hawaii being the center of the Pacific, it really resonates with what we're trying to illustrate here. It's all about, the world is all about seafood. Nalu is all about a new wave of thinking. So you'll find a great deal of information, on our press section, news section, and resources section. And we're happy to connect with any of your listeners. So thank you.
Great. Thank you again. All right, everybody, that wraps us up for this episode. We appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.